Binyan, shoresh, ha'al, hif'il. What does it all mean? Today I will give you a brief overview of the Hebrew verbal system. Shalom and welcome back to Hebrew Grammar Help. Hebrew verbs seem really complicated, and that's because they are indeed complicated. They're even more complicated in biblical Hebrew. Today, I will explain the main points of how the system works and define some terms that you will hear and probably have already heard, and explain some of the basics of the tenses. I want to mention that if you are strictly learning biblical Hebrew, the first part of this video does apply to you, and it takes up way more than half the video. So when I get to tenses, that's when you might want to zone out because the tenses are really different in biblical Hebrew. All right, our first vocabulary word for this video is shoresh, and the plural is shorashim. And I'm going to remind you that a very big chunk of Hebrew words, including 100% of the verbs, are based on a shoresh. And a shoresh is a 3 or 4 letter root that provides the basis for a lot of words. So if you don't understand shorashim, you can go and check out my video titled Shorashim. And that would be a good idea to really understand the shorashim before watching this video. Our next word is binyan, and the plural is binyanim. So a binyan is a category of verb, and the verbs in each category or binyan share characteristics in their conjugations. So why do we care about binyanim? Well, if we learn the conjugation rules for a binyan, and then we come across a new verb and we recognize what binyan it is, then we will know how to conjugate it. It saves us from having to learn all of the conjugations for each verb, which is definitely a good thing. Most verbs have 26 different forms, and so it is definitely better to memorize 26 forms times 7 binyanim than 26 forms times hundreds or potentially thousands of verbs that you're going to hopefully learn in your Hebrew journey. So there are 7 binyanim, and their names are Pa'al, Pi'el, Hif'il, Hitpa'el, Huf'al, Hu'al, and Nif'al. If you're super observant, you might notice something about the names of the binyanim. You might notice that they all have a pe, an ayin, and a lamed, all in that order. Pe, ayin, lamed is, in fact, a shoresh having to do with action or activity. And in fact, the word po'al means verb because it is the action in a sentence. So the names of the binyanim are what this root, pe, ayin, lamed, would look like in the past tense, third person, singular, masculine form in each binyan. It's really an ingenious method of naming the binyanim because it helps us learners figure out how to say the verbs, at least in the past tense. So, for example, pa'al verbs generally have an a vowel pattern in the past tense. And PL verbs will have an E sound indicated by this yod after the first shoresh letter. Hif'il verbs have a hey at the beginning that sounds like he, and so on and so on. And I want to mention that some people refer to the binyan pa'al as kal. And that's because kal means simple, and pa'al is the simplest of the binyanim. There's no extra letters in any tenses. I also want to take the time now to talk a little bit about the relationship among the binyanim. You might see the binyanim listed like this on a 7-branched menorah. This shows the relationship between the pairs of binyanim that are related to each other. So on one side, we see active verbs, pa'al, pi'el, and hif'il. And it really doesn't matter which side of the menorah is which. Then on the other side of the menorah are the passive verbs. Okay, right here, I'm going to do a quickie review of active and passive voice. In active verbs, the subject is usually doing the action, and there may or may not be an object of that verb. So I can say, David wrote the book, and David is the subject because he did the writing. And wrote is the verb, and the book is the direct object of the verb wrote. So David wrote the book is an active sentence. But we can also say the book was written by David. And so we're saying the same thing, but with a slightly different focus. Now the book is the subject of the sentence, and the verb changes to was written. And we don't even have to include the writer if we don't want to. We can just say the book was written. So in English, to make passive voice, we use a be verb, like was, and then this past participle, written. But in Hebrew, we can sometimes use the same shoresh, but with a passive binyan. Each active binyan matches with a passive binyan. So ha'al verbs use nif'al for their passive forms. Pi'el verbs use pu'al for their passive. And hif'il verbs have hufal as their passive binyan. Now, this may seem complicated, and it is. I said it was. But understanding this can help you if you hear an unfamiliar verb, and you might be able to work out the meaning. So, quick example. Let's say someone says, Huzmanti la misiba. And you think, I don't know that verb, huzmanti. Maybe you know the other word, la misiba, and you know it means to the party. And if you know that hizmanti means I invited, then you might be able to figure out that huzmanti means I was invited. This all takes a lot of time and practice and exposure and familiarity with the verbs and all of the parts of the verbs. But if you stick with it, you can get to a point where you can figure these things out during a conversation. So you've got 3 active and 3 passive binyanim. But what about hitpa'el? Hitpa'el is what is called a reflexive verb. Most of the verbs have some kind of meaning of doing something to oneself, like getting dressed, or 2 people doing things to each other, like getting married, or corresponding, like writing to each other. So it doesn't have a passive form because it's kind of its own passive form. Now, you might see a binyan menorah that looks like this, using words like simple, intensive, causative. There might even be a factative in there. For me, I think it might be helpful to understand simple versus causative. For example, to remember versus to remind, which is causing someone to remember. But these relationships are not set in stone. And with so many other things to remember about verbs, this is not the most important. And since these words are kind of unfamiliar, intensive, like what does that even mean? So these terms can be more confusing than helpful. So if you find these terms helpful, then go ahead and remember them and use them. But if they're confusing you, then just ignore them. Okay, moving on. So a binyan is one of the 7 main categories, and a gizra is a subcategory within these main categories. And the plural of gizra is gzarot. Verbs of a gizra all share a similar modification to the main pattern, due usually to a problem letter. So here I'm showing you all of the gzarot that I can remember from the binyan pa'al. Amazingly, I cannot find a complete and exhaustive list of gzarot. So there is a gizrat hashlemim. Shlemim means complete, and this is how we refer to the regular group. It's complete because no letters have dropped out or changed. The rest of the gzarot are referred to a very special way. Gzarot are usually described by their problem letter, and we have a very specific way to identify the problem letter. We start with the position that the letter is in, and then we name the problem letter. We name the position by using the same 3 letters that we use to name the binyanim, Pe, Ayin, and Lamed. Some people will say something to the effect of the first letter of the shoresh or the second letter of the shoresh. And I do that when I think my viewers aren't familiar with this other way. But it's a lot faster and a lot more common to refer to the position using this Pe, Ayin, Lamed system. So if we are talking about problem child Yod in the first letter of the shoresh, the first letter is Pe, so we would refer to this gizra as Pe Yod. And so we write it like this. We have Pe, and then the Gershaim, which is the double apostrophe, and then Yod. And so something like Pe Yod tells us that we are talking about a subcategory in which the first position, the Pe position of the verb, has a Yod. And so if we come back to this chart, we see that the first letter of the names of the gzarot is always either Pe, Ayin, or Lamed. And the second letter of the name of the gizra can be anything really, but it's usually one of the guttural letters. And the guttural letters are Aleph, He, Chet, Ayin, and sometimes Resh. Or the so-called weak letters, which are Aleph, He, Yod, and Nun. And these are the letters that cause problems. So these are just the gzarot for pa'al verbs. Look at this chart. These are all the gzarot for all the binyanim that I can remember. Every binyan has its own set of gzarot. A letter that causes problems in one binyan might not be a problem at all in another. Or even if we have a Pe Yod in Pa'al and in Hit Pa'el, the changes that occur because of that Yod are very different in Pa'al from in Hit Pa'el. So you have to learn each one within its binyan. Now, before you freak out, and I would too, looking at this big list, remember that these gzarot are subcategories of a binyan for a reason. For the most part, the changes are somewhat minor, and if you make a mistake, you will still be easily understood. The one big exception is binyan pa'al, gizrot ayin yod, and ayin vav. These gzarot have such drastic changes that it's hard to even recognize them as pa'al. So you learn the shlemim conjugations of all the binyanim and of binyan pa'al, ayin yod, and ayin vav, and you are practically there. Then you learn the changes that occur because of the special letter. The changes might only be in one tense or only in a handful of forms. So it's not like with each gizra, you have to learn a whole new set of conjugations. So again, looking at this chart, we can see that they all have a gizrat hashlemim, because of course there's a regular conjugation for every binyan. And they all also have a lamed yod slash lamed hey. I follow the academia in referring to these as lamed yod, but many educators refer to these as lamed hey. This is the one subcategory that causes the same or very similar changes across all the binyanim. So once you learn the changes because of a lamed yod, lamed hey in one binyan, it will make sense in all of the others. But for all of the rest of the gzarot, you will have to remember how that special letter causes a change in this particular binyan. And also in Pi'el, Hitpa'el, and Pu'al, there is also a gizra called Meruba'im. The shoresh that means four is resh bet ayin. And so meruba'im means that this is a shoresh with four letters. So it's special, but not because of a particular problem letter, but rather because there are four letters. So I'm not going to talk too much about tenses. Next week, I'll have a video that gives all of the suffixes and prefixes for all of the different tenses. Today, all I'm going to say is that modern Hebrew is usually said to have four tenses. And this is really different from biblical Hebrew. The indicators that show tense in modern Hebrew actually indicate aspect in biblical Hebrew, which is really different from tense. So one tense is past tense, which deals with anything in the past, no matter how distant. Biblical scholars call this perfect. Modern Hebrew has present tense, which is, the present. And biblical Hebrew scholars call this a participle. Present tense in modern Hebrew correlates to present tense in English, such as in a sentence like, I read every day. Or it can also correlate to present progressive, which is like, I am reading right now. And then there's future tense, which biblical scholars call imperfect. For modern Hebrew purposes, this tense is used for anything that's going to happen in the future, and it is also used for commands or for desires about other people, like saying, I want him to do something. We use the future tense for that. The last so-called tense is the imperative, which is like a command. Linguists and grammarians will tell you that imperative is a mood, not a tense. Whatever. You still have to learn the conjugations. The beauty is that there are only 3 conjugations because commands are only for you people. So they're all second person, and there's a masculine, a feminine, and a plural. There is also a feminine plural, but I've only heard it in songs. I have never actually heard anybody ever use it anywhere. Hebrew also has one compound tense, and compound tenses are made with more than one verb form. So there's a helping verb and a main verb. And like in English, if I say, I have done something, then have is the helping verb, or sometimes we call it the auxiliary verb, and done is the main verb. So in Hebrew, past habitual is used to indicate something that happened repeatedly in the past. Hebrew teachers don't really talk about this as a tense because it is just formed by using the past tense of the be verb plus the present tense of the main verb. And so there are no new conjugations to learn, and it's a very easy thing for learners to learn. So that is all I have to say about verbs today. I think I covered all the main points. Next week, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about tenses in general. And in future videos, I will be going through each binyan and each gizra one by one and showing all of the conjugations. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, or if there's something I forgot to explain, please leave it in the comments and I will do my best to respond. Then also, if you have some aspect of Hebrew grammar that has you flummoxed, let me know and I will do my best to explain it in a future video. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and press the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot bapa'am aba'ah. See you next time.